everybody. We are so excited to have you here today with us at this ON1 Photo RAW live event. We have an incredible look at Photo RAW today that you guys are going to get to take a look at all of the new features, what's going to be coming next, and everything that's going on with ON1 as a whole. There's a ton of incredible stuff we're going to go over today. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure that I introduce everybody who is standing at this table. We have an incredible group of people here who are going to walk you through different parts of the software and what ON1 does. So I'll start out. My name is LePage, and I've actually been working with ON1 for about 6 or 7 years now. You may not recognize my face, but you probably recognize my voice. I've been doing educational tutorials for ON1 for a really long time. I'm also a professional photographer, retoucher, and educator, and I live here in Portland, Oregon. Now, the next person I want to introduce is Dan, and he's pretty incredible.
Hi, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Dan Harlicker. I'm the Director of Product Management at ON1. I've been with the company for 10 years. I help with the design and implementation of the features that you guys use every day. Before this, I was a professional photographer, Photoshop trainer, and digital imaging consultant. Hudson?
I'm Hudson Henry. I'm a local Portland, Oregon photographer and photo educator, and I'm really proud to be hosting this event here in my studio today. When I go out and take photographs, I think the thing that excites me the most is getting to really hard to get to wild places. I like to shoot people, action, landscapes. I like to create really high resolution images and print them ginormous. Over the last year, I've had the great pleasure of coaching the ON1 Plus community, and we're going to talk a lot more about that today, along with Photo RAW. And one of the coaches that I love working with is Blake here.
Thanks, Hudson. I'm Blake Rudis with F64Academy.com. I'm a Photoshop and photography educator. I pride myself in photo workflow systems. I develop and teach workflow systems on how you can move about your images from point A to point B. I've been working with ON1 for several years now, and I'm proud to be here, happy to be here, and see how I can implement some of the Photo RAW stuff with the workflow that I do.
So with this group of people today, we're going to be separating everything down into 3 live sessions for you. We're going to be talking about what's new in Photo RAW and all of our favorite features. And I know that each one of us has a feature that we're most excited about. So we're going to be talking about that. Blake and Hudson are going to be talking a lot about Lightroom and Photoshop integration in our session 2. And in session 3, we're going to be talking about our ON1 Plus community and what's coming next in ON1. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to have a ton of questions out there, which is awesome. Please feel free to tweet us with the hashtag #AskON1, and you can ask us any questions about the software that you want. We know that there's a lot that we're going to be talking about today, so I also want to make sure you guys know it's going to be recorded. So if you miss anything, if you have to go grab some food and you miss a little bit, it's going to be recorded so you guys don't have to worry about missing anything. Now, in between each one of the live sessions, we're also going to be showing a preview of Matt Kloskowski's master course all about ON1 Photo RAW and a little bit of the ON1 location videos. So you guys are going to have a ton of information at you today. So in between all these live sessions, you're still getting a lot of information about ON1 Photo RAW, which is kind of awesome. Now, the first video that we're going to show you guys, the first video that I'm going to show you guys is actually all about the big new features inside of ON1 Photo RAW. All right, everybody. I know you guys are super excited about what's new inside of Photo RAW, and I want to show you all of that because it's really awesome. But before I do that, there's a couple of key things I want to point out. Remember that when you get ON1 Photo RAW and it's finally with you, there's no subscription required. It is 100% yours, and you can use it as long as you like. It's also for Mac and Windows, and Windows users, you guys don't have to wait. Everything ships on the same day, so that's really cool. Now, the lightning fast RAW processor is definitely what we're really excited, but I want to make sure that you guys remember that this is also a photo editor. So we've combined all of this together so that you can search through and access your RAW files using Browse and Develop, but you still have things like effects, layers, and resize to continue your editing process. So it all comes together in one. Now, if you're a big Lightroom or Photoshop user, which I know a lot of you guys are, don't worry. This still works as a plugin for you guys. We include all of your favorite ON1 tools like the perfect eraser, the perfect brush. We've got all those masking tools that I know you guys like to use, along with brand new options that you may not know about yet. And I'm going to walk you guys through a lot of these really awesome new features. And I'm going to do that by editing a couple of images so that you can really see the software in use. I've got a whole bunch of images open here inside of Browse, and a lot of them are wedding images from the same shoot. If you're like me, you're going to be processing a lot of photos all at once. You probably end up with photo shoots with hundreds or even thousands of images. Most of my weddings are thousands of images. And the reason why this new update for Browse is going to be such a big deal is primarily because we've got brand new faster processing speeds. There's no importing or cataloging, which saves you on time, but you still have access to a really powerful database, so your previews are going to pop up crazy fast. Now, one of the super awesome features in Browse is the new film strip view. You're able to take a look at a closer look of your image while still being able to keep your place in all of the photos in a strip down at the bottom. This is my favorite way to sort through photos because it's really easy to keep track of where you are. Sometimes when you're editing a lot of images like me, and it's slightly late at night, you get a little lost in where you are in that shoot. It's like, oh my gosh, am I nearing the end? How many more photos do I have? This is just a great way to keep track. Now, I can sort through these photos really quickly. I have access to all of the rating, labeling, and liking options that you're used to. So a lot of these images have stars or labels attached to them, and that's because that's how I really love to sort my photos. So I have a ton of options here, and you guys are probably used to that. One of the things that you might not be used to is access to presets here inside of Browse. So on the left-hand side, I actually have my LePage signature collection of presets open, and these are a whole bunch that I've created for Photo RAW, and I've actually applied one to this image. It's my Studio Portrait Simple preset, and it's just a really good high contrast bright white preset that's really great, and it gives a lot of the greens in your image more of a bluish tone. I love it. It works great. It's awesome for studio portraits, but I've figured out that it's actually great across the board for a lot of different portrait presets and for wedding presets. So one of the super cool things that you can do now is sync your settings here inside of Browse. And what's cool is when you sync these settings, they actually sync with your other computers that have access to these photos. So the metadata and the settings are going to change on your other computer if you're accessing them from a sharing service. So that's really cool. Now, I've got this photo here that I've got a preset applied to, and you'll notice if I move over to the right in my film strip, there's a whole series of decoration style photos from this wedding that I want to sync together and make them look unified. I'm just going to select my edited image, hold the Shift key, and click on the last photo. These are all raw photos straight out of the camera, no adjustments. And then I'm going to control click or right click on my original file and choose sync settings. All of a sudden, those images immediately change. So you can see the previews down at the bottom switch from their original image to this brand new preset. Now, if I didn't like this preset for some reason and I want to apply a different one, I can just go over and click on a new preset. All of those photos are going to automatically change, and that new preset is going to be applied. So this is a really cool way to play around with your photos, and what's great is there's no waiting time. I'm talking through this in real time, so this happens crazy fast. Now, one of the big things that's really important to remember here, and one of the big new features that we're going to talk about a lot today, is the fact that you have access to RAW processing. RAW is crazy amazing, you guys. This is the first new modern RAW processor in years, and it supports hundreds of digital cameras. And what's important about RAW is the fact that you have access to a larger amount of tones and colors in your image, and you can play around with more of those tones than you would in a JPEG file. All of the adjustments that are made with your RAW files can be made on other file types like JPEG and TIFF, but RAW is really important if you're going to be making big edits to your photos, and If you're like me and sometimes you over or underexpose accidentally, it's a lot easier to save files that could have been lost with RAW. Now, everything here is also non-destructive. It's real-time editing. So as you saw when I updated all of these photos here, they all just popped up automatically. Those changes happened crazy fast. But I'm not stuck with any of these changes. I can reset anything that I don't like. For instance, this photo is a little dark compared to the others, so I just want to reset it back to the factory defaults. I can control click or right click and select the reset settings option, and it goes back to my original file. The other thing that's really cool is if I take this image into one of the programs that I use to create this preset, I use Develop and Effects. If I jump into Develop with this file, you'll notice that on the right-hand side, all of those changes that I made to create this preset exist. So when you open it up, you can make adjustments to it, and that's a really, really big deal. If you get stuck with a preset, it can be really frustrating if you can't make changes. And there's a couple things I might want to do to this image. Now, what's even better is the seamless transition from Develop to Effects. And these are going to be the two programs that I know a lot of you are going to be using back to back. So if I want to decide to go to Effects, it happened that fast. Again, no video magic there. It literally jumps from one program to the next that quickly. And that makes a huge difference. The other thing that's really cool is I can access all of these different effect stylings. All of the filters that I use to create this preset are open, and I can make changes without any of the other filters hiding or not being applied. So one of the things that I really like to do for this preset is I applied a photo filter to the highlights. And for this image, it's not quite as intense as I want. So I'll just take that amount slider and move it to the right. And you'll see all the other changes to this image exist while I'm making edits to that filter layer. So that's really, really cool. And if I make these changes and jump back into Browse, they're going to be saved to this image, which is great. The other thing that's important to note is that the tools and controls that you have access to don't stick. So everything can be seen in real time and then reset without hurting your images. So you can make adjustments anywhere that you want and reset anything that you need to. You're not stuck with any of the adjustments that you make. Everything is readjustable. The other thing I want to point out while I'm here inside of Effects is if you'll notice on the left-hand side of my screen, I have access to my perfect eraser, my retouch brush, along with all of my masking tools that I know you guys are used to. The retouching tools anywhere is a big deal. Instead of having to go into layers, create a PSD file, retouching can happen live on an image that you have open inside of Effects. So if I open up my eraser here and I click and drag on something that I don't like in my image, those changes will pop up automatically and I can edit out things that I don't like. So if some of these stone highlights are bothering me just a little bit, I can go through and I can click on those, make those changes, and jump back into Browse when I'm done. So I'm not stuck having to go into a different program, and that's really, really cool. The last thing that I want to mention while I'm here inside of Effects, and this is going to be something you'll be able to access and develop as well, are local adjustments. We have this new local adjustments tool, and what's really great about this is that just like everything else, these tools exist in a non-destructive manner and in the programs that you need them. So it exists here inside of Effects, inside of Develop, and if I don't like any of them, they stick with my raw processing and I can delete anything I don't like. So if I want to, I can move my exposure slider to the right, go to my tool options bar with my masking brush selected, and I can make sure that my opacity is kind of low. I don't want to lighten too much. And anywhere in the image that needs to be brighter, I'm just going to click on and lighten. So some of these parts of the shoe are a little dark. I'm just going to brighten them up a tiny bit, not a lot. And then I can also click to add a layer, and let's go ahead and add a little bit of darkness. We're going to drop that exposure down, and let's click and drag on the bottom part of my image. I can make my brush a little bit bigger, and let's click and drag a little bit more. And there we go. So I can go in and I can dodge and burn on my photos, and anything that I don't like can be adjusted to my liking, removed if I don't like it. So if this layer was a little too much, just hit that trash can and I'm good to go. Now, before I leave you guys, there's a couple things I want to mention. There's a lot more to come. We're not stopping with one version. We've got more incredible features and free updates for users just around the corner. So I know that a lot of you are asking for specific features that may not be in this first version. Don't worry. We're working on those things that you guys really, really want here inside of RAW, and we'll make sure that we get as much as we can in that first update. We're also going to have Q&As for people who want to ask questions. I know that a lot of you are really curious about even more when it comes to RAW. I can only cover so much right now, so we want to hand it over to you guys to let you ask what's important to you. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Dan, and we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth about some of these totally awesome new features.
Wow, Liz, that was amazing. I'm so excited about all those great new features in ON1 Photo RAW. If you've just coming back or just joining us, we're here in Hudson Studio for ON1 Live. A couple reminders, everything we're watching today is recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again in the future. If you want to submit questions, we'll be taking those throughout the day. You'll want to use Twitter. You want to use the hashtag AskON1. All right, now let's jump in and talk about some of these great new features. We saw a lot in Liz's video, and I think each of us kind of have our own little pet new features that we love, and I wanted to talk about two of my favorites. So the first one is more from a workflow point of view, and that's sidecar files. So I work on a laptop and a desktop. A lot of time I'll use my laptop in the field, and what I'll do is I can download my photos from my camera straight to my laptop, and I use the sidecar feature, which you can turn on in the preferences. And what that does is it records everything you do, all of your settings, all of your brush strokes, all of your metadata that you add onto the photos as you work. And then I use Dropbox to synchronize my work between my laptop and the desktop. So as I make all those edits, those sidecar files get written, they get moved up to the cloud, they get synchronized. When I get back to my desktop at home, everything's there already. All the photos are already there. All of the settings are already there. So I don't have to copy files back and forth. I don't have to worry about creating a catalog and moving a catalog and relinking files. It's a seamless, great way to move your content from machine to machine.
Yeah, I work on a laptop all the time too in the field, and I can really picture, uploading that stuff to Dropbox, coming home, and it's all right there on my Mac Pro, just like it was on my MacBook Pro. That's a really, really time-saving feature.
Yeah, I love it. And what I'll do is I'll take my Dropbox folder in Browse and I'll make it what we call an indexed folder or a favorite. And that way it keeps track of it. It just watches it in the background. I don't have to go through any importing or cataloging process. It just watches that folder. So when any new photos appear, they just magically show up and they're searchable and viewable and ready to go. It's really handy.
And even if you're a Lightroom user like me, if you've gone through and you've done all your culling and your sorting, you could you sort it down to 2-star images and then just import that into Lightroom. You can just bring in the stuff that you actually want to work with and not spend hours building previews and catalogs for images you're never going to even work on in the first place. That's a huge time saver.
It's really cool.
I'm going to take your tips on that one because that just sounds incredible. You guys know my system is pretty archaic, and we'll talk about that later, but that sounds awesome, so I'm going to be looking forward to that one.
It's very cool. Well, let me show you what other thing. This is more from an artistic perspective. If you guys are old ON1 customers, you probably remember Focal Point. It was a tool that let you control your depth of field. I want to show you how far that's come in Photo RAW. So here, let's take a look. I'm on my laptop here, and I've opened up this night scene here in Portland. I'm in the effects module, and watch. I'm just going to click on Add Filter, and I'll add lens blur. Bam! Look how fast it is. One of the really cool things about Photo RAW is that we've rebuilt everything from the ground up. So the only thing that's still there from the past is just the user interface. The whole imaging pipeline has been modernized, the preview engine, all of the tools, all of the presets, you name it. Everything under the hood is rebuilt from scratch to work in a non-destructive RAW workflow. So watch how fast this is. I'm just going to grab the amount slider. I'm going to wiggle it back and forth. You can see how in real time it adds that lens blur. The lights even twinkle like it's a video. Isn't that crazy? Awesome. So I can control exactly how much blur I want, how much blooming I want, and this is all done in real time. And this is on like a 3 or 4 year old laptop as well. Now watch, it gets even better when I combine that with the masking bug. I'll grab the masking bug, For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the masking bug is a flexible, re-editable gradient mask tool. I'll add the reflected shape. This allows me to set the region I want in focus in the middle. I just click in the middle on the handle to drag it in position. I can then grab the solid lines to set just the areas that I want in and out of focus. And then I can grab the little feather lines and I can control how quickly it goes in and out of focus. It's just like using a tilt shift lens, or if you're an old school 4x5 guy like me, this is your Schleimflug right here. You can control exactly what's in focus just like that. And everything is just lightning fast. So it's really cool to have the power of a tilt shift lens or a really fast, like a 1.8 or 1.4 lens after the fact. You can shoot everything at 5.6 and then pick just what you want to be in focus. It's really, really cool.
The thing that blows my mind too is that you can control the feather independently, the base feather and the upper feather, which you can't do that with Schleimflug.
Yeah, well, exactly. I can get I can have it go from a quick transition in the foreground, a longer transition in the background, like it would be in real life.
Right.
So
that's something I just
cool.
learned watching you do that. That's really a cool feature.
The impressive part about it, though, is when you look at how the bokeh shifts with that.
Yeah.
And usually when you use, lens blurs or filtering capabilities in other software, you don't really get that nice bokeh type look. And it's hard the only really way to fix that is to reshoot it. But here you actually get this blooming effect with those lights in the background that's one of those, you just taught me something new in this whole new what's new section.
Well, and lens blur is really different than a regular blur. If you were to take a regular blur and put it on your photo and then use a mask to blend it in, it will never look realistic because you're changing opacity. Blur doesn't change opacity. It actually changes how sharp something is or how blurry something is. So if you actually look, if we can go back to the laptop, if you actually look at the transition, you'll see how the specular highlights, they actually get smaller and smaller and smaller as you get from out of focus to in focus. They're not the same size, but softer. It works just like real focus does. So it looks real. It's not like a computerized fake blur.
Right, that's impressive.
It looks beautiful. And the other thing that's really impressive watching you work on this, and the first thing that I noticed when I got a hold of my copy of the software is just how fast everything's moving through that GPU processing pipeline.
Yeah.
I mean, the sliders are instantaneous, and things are just moving so much faster than I'm used to in Photo 10. It makes me really, really happy as a user.
And I got to give a huge shout out to our development team, all the engineers and QA folks who've been working on this for the last year. They have really worked their butts off to create an amazing new product from the ground up. So I'm very proud of you guys.
Well, and speaking of amazing new product, I really want to mention one of my favorite new features. This is a new modern RAW processor. Like, I feel like we need to shout that from the rooftops. Like, this is a new modern RAW processor.
Right.
This is a really, really big deal, you guys. And if you're like me, I love options. I'm a person that loves to have lots of different options so that I can choose what works best for me. And Blake and I have talked a little bit about the fact that he's very specific about workflow. And I love that I can change my workflow depending on what I do. And having a new option for a RAW processor, instead of being pigeonholed into one option, is really exciting. And I think a lot of people are going to be really stoked about playing around with this new product. I feel like you guys need to be like really excited. I'm so excited. This is so cool.
And the fact, I mean, for those of you that aren't used to working on RAW, you have so much more latitude to save a shot that's slightly underexposed, to correct a white balance that wasn't quite right in the field. There's so much latitude to work with your image, get rid of noise, increase your shot. And sometimes when you work with JPEGs from a camera, the camera just makes some of these decisions wrong. It just gives you the possibility of going through and making those decisions and saving an image after the fact, or just tweaking it more artistically once you get home and have a different thought about how you want to convey the image. The other thing that we've got with this new RAW processor is masked, layered workflow in RAW, which is just that bends my mind. I think it's just awesome.
Let me mention one thing. So we talk a lot about RAW, and even the product is called RAW. It works on any file. So if you shoot JPEG, you get all those same benefits. You can work in a non-destructive workflow with a JPEG or a TIFF or even a PSD file, just like you would with a RAW file. A JPEG may not have all of the range, but the algorithms that we use are amazing. It actually takes that JPEG and it treats it like it's a RAW photo. So you can actually get as much information on the highlights and shadows as you want with the built-in high bit depth ProPhoto RGB tone mapping that it does on every photo.
But you're still going to be a little bit more limited in your latitude.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. You're not going to get as much out of the highlights and shadows as you would out of a raw photo, but whatever's there, we will get and make look great.
That's awesome.
Well, I came out in September to hang out in ON1 Studios, and you gave me a brief kind of presentation about what Photo RAW was going to be. And I think what my expectation of Photo RAW was and what you showed me were night and day. Because I was thinking, okay, it's going to be Photo 11, right? Because I'm used to the upgrades and the differences between effects and what was it at the time? It was enhance. But when you showed me what the capabilities were, you basically took all of the greatness that was in those previous launches and you put them into one kind of one-stop shop. So now everything's under one roof. It's all housed under one spot. You do your raw development. You can go into effects, and it's lightning fast. And we have to talk about that speed. That's definitely one of those things, because going from browse into develop into effects, I'm doing it without having to wait for previews or anything. And I have a pretty fast computer, but I've actually put this on my laptop. I put it on my mid-range computer, and I put it on my wicked fast computer. And it doesn't really matter. I don't really see any difference in the actual speed of how things are working. Yeah. So it's impressive, and it's definitely something to shout out to the folks that have been working on this for the last several months.
I was blown away. I remember hearing the kind of roadmap. I've been working with ON1 and in the Plus community this last year, and I knew this is coming. And to say you're going to completely just blow up everything and start from scratch, I remember thinking, wow, that is ambitious. Are we really going to see this in 2016? And it's pretty awesome that we are. So
yeah, it was an amazing undertaking, a ton of work. And honestly, we've been laying the foundations for this the last several years, but this is really the year where the rubber met the road, where we really had to take all that work we've done and integrate it and build a completely new product from it. So
you guys knocked it out of the park.
And I think even in our initial conversations, I had emailed, I think it was either Patrick or Nathan, about, it was in April. And I said, can you have all of this stuff in one spot? I mean, is that possible? And he said, hold on a second, we'll talk in a couple months. And I was like, wait, are they actually going to do that? But to see it happen in such a short period of time, and especially as impressive as it is, because it is a complete, I don't want to say that you've thrown everything out the window or completely revamped everything, but you've started from the ground up and kind of modular based all of your items into one spot. So you did start from the ground up and rebuilt this whole new raw processor.
Yeah. And yet it's familiar.
Exactly.
It's familiar to those of us that have been using it. I mean, you don't have to worry. It's not going to seem, like some alien new thing to you.
Right.
Everything fits in place, and actually it's just improved. There's some things like mid-stack rendering that are just like something I've always wanted using effects. Now I can turn off one of the filter layers and still see everything that's affecting it above, which is huge.
Yeah, well, to me that's one of the biggest new features. And for those of you guys who may not understand that, if you're an old effects user, the whole idea is you stack filters on top of each other, just like you put filters over your camera lens. Well, in the old days, you would actually have to turn off everything above it when you wanted to adjust something. So let's say I put like a tone enhancer and then a black and white. Well, if I want to go back and adjust that tone enhancer, the black and white turns off.
Yeah.
Well, that makes it really hard to make my decisions, because my decisions are based on what it looks like in black and white.
Yeah.
You don't have that anymore. You can see the entire stack live all the time.
Yeah.
And it's crazy fast. So you can adjust things way down at the bottom, and it just rises through everything.
As I was experimenting with it too, I was turning the layers on and off, and that's impressive in and of itself. But you can also drag the effects from one spot on top of the other one. So you actually have layer-based effects, like because I'm a Photoshop guy. I like to be able to, I like this layer down here, but what happens if I bring it up here? Well, now you can do that in ON1 Photo RAW too, where you grab an effect and you just bring it right on top of the rest of the stack, and it still has that mid-stack rendering also. So that was a feature that I was like, okay, hold on. Stop right here. What are you guys doing? All right, because these are things that we expected to happen in Photo 10, but they didn't because of the capability. But now with the new interface and the new engine that you've got working on it,
Right.
you have that capability.
I think a lot of it has to do with the speed and your ability to,
Yeah. Putting everything in the GPU is a game changer for not just performance, but for workflow. The things you can do now, the things that are unlocked by having everything be real time. Take that lens blur that we showed you, for example. For those of you who used an earlier version, you'd make those adjustments. It would take like 2 seconds for the previewed update, where now it's doing it 60 times a second. It's a totally different world now.
Oh, it's
Well,
flickering.
It's all about speed. I mean, when you're dealing with a large amount of photos all at once, you need to be able to edit them quickly. You need to be able to jump from module to module. You need to be able to browse your photos quickly. Everything needs to be done faster. And so, if you have the ability to save a large amount of time, I mean, you know, if you're working for clients, it's an even bigger deal. But even if you're working on personal projects, I know a lot of people out there just shoot photography for fun, which is awesome. But you come home from a shoot and you want to look through all your images and you want to edit the ones you're really excited about at the beginning. And it's just that speed is going to be huge. And I think it's going to change people's workflow a lot.
Well, you know, and speed is what really brought me to ON1 in the first place. I originally worked in Photoshop, and then I started moving into Lightroom with Photoshop for finishing my images, and I would apply layer after layer, you know, curve after curve layer, kind of getting those adjustments just like I wanted, and masking, and I would get the look that I wanted. And then ON1 comes along, and with a few clicks and filter additions and some simple masking and the perfect brush and all these other really cool tools, boom, I just turned 5 minutes of editing in Photoshop into 15, 30 seconds. And for people like Liz and I that work for clients and sometimes we'll come back from a shoot with 5,000 images, you know, being able to cull quickly, which is another thing we'll talk about later, and being able to edit more quickly is just more time to be out in the field doing what we love, which is creating new images. And you know, I think we've been talking about all these new features for a while now. Blake and I both have some videos showcasing what some of our favorite things are as we're actually using the software. So I think we're going to show you guys that. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this stuff. There are really so many features that I'm excited about in ON1 Photo RAW. One of them is just sort of subtle, the fact that when I'm sitting here in the Browse module, I'm doing my culling, sorting, organizing, there's a presets tab now on the left panel here, and I can just jump straight in and apply presets to images as I'm going through and doing my organizing. I don't necessarily, for some levels of image, even need to go into development effects. Or if, for example, I'm applying a set of develop moves and effects filters to a set of images that were photographed identically, I can just jump in here, apply a preset. I don't even have to go tripping through development effects. It's like right there, handy. So presets are going to be basically everywhere that you're working with your image. As I jump into the develop module, we've still got the presets panel right here. We can still just keep working with presets. And then we've got, of course, the most amazing new feature, the ability to work with RAW files in ON1. I'm going to go ahead and shrink down this panel to get a little more room. I'm going to show you another feature that I really love, which is the film strip. Film strip lets you really easily move from one image to another without jumping back into browse. You know, here you are in the develop module. We've got all these great sliders to play with, from exposure, I'll just go ahead and zero that back out, to shadows, to all of the raw developing tools that you really want to get your basic tone and color dialed in. I've got sharpening activated in here. It's all working on the raw file non-destructively. I've got a whole more bunch of options that I could choose to add in here. And even more excitingly, I can bounce with my raw file from here in the develop module right in to ON1 effects, and I can start applying filters, the filters that I know and love using, but in the past was only limited to using in PSD files, on JPEG files, on TIFF files. Well, now direct from the camera raw files. And I can go in here, I can add tone enhancing moves, add a little bit of dynamic contrast. And here's a really cool feature, mid-stack rendering. I can have a look at what dynamic contrast would do if I turned it off without turning off the filters that are above it. I've got a couple of color enhancing filters, a fall color enhancer just to add a little punch to the clouds, and a sky enhancer. And while we're talking about the filters in the effects stack, let's not forget one of the most amazing new features of all, and that's this mask right here. And I know a lot of you are saying, well, wait a minute, I've been using effects a long time. Masks are nothing new. Well, let's not forget that this mask is on the raw file. We're talking about layered, masked editing on
straight from the camera raw files. It's really exciting new day for photo editing, and I can't be more happy to be a part of it. So in this particular image, on this layer, I was doing a green color enhancer, a foliage color enhancer. I didn't really want to draw attention and pop the greens in the foreground grasses. I wanted them a little more silhouette-y, a little more low-key. So I just went ahead and masked that filter out in the foreground softly. Piece of cake. Another really cool feature that's happening here that you'll notice is local adjustments. Local adjustments are for local adjustment brushes and local adjustment graduated filters. You can choose which settings you're tweaking with those. Here I've got a graduated filter set to just darken the sky a bit. I've got exposure pulled down, saturation boosted a little bit, contrast boosted. It's to kind of give the sky a little boost, because in general, when you're photographing reflections, the sky is a little brighter than the reflection in the water, and so sometimes balancing those helps a little bit. Here you can see as I turn the opacity down in that local adjustment, you can see what the effect is that I was going for. The neat thing that I really liked that the engineers at ON1 did was they left this local adjustment tab available whether you're in the develop module or whether you're in effects. Now I just flipped to developing. You didn't see much change. That's because we're not looking at the overall develop settings. We go into here, we're clearly in develop again. We're looking at our basic develop slider set, and I've got sharpening activated as well. If I go into local adjustments, I'm still looking at this graduated filter. And that's really nice, because even if I've jumped in here, look at overall settings and effects, you know, maybe something that I did in an effects filter tweaks with that, and I want to adjust that graduated filter that I'd laid in there. Maybe it made the sky too blue, so I want to go in here and back saturation back down on my local adjustment. I don't have to jump back into develop and go to local adjustment. It's available wherever I'm editing, which is really nice. So, you know, once again, we have this crazy ability to bounce back and forth between our basic raw developing sliders and our finish editing effects filters, and we're doing masked layered workflow on raw files. Oh yeah, one more really crazy cool feature is the crop tool. Really nice new crop tool, and you can sort of just move the image around within it. It's great. Does everything that we need it to do. I guess the biggest challenge that I have now moving into ON1 Photo RAW is just tweaking my workflow a little bit to take advantage of all the really cool new powerful features that we've got to use with raw files in this new and exciting time. So it's a good problem to have. And so now I'm going to throw it over to Blake and let him showcase some of his favorite new features in Photo RAW.
Thanks, Hudson. Those are some great features. There's a couple that I want to touch on that I really do enjoy in ON1 Photo RAW. The first one is going to be the retouch brush for cleaning up my dirty, filthy sensor that you're going to see here. And then the a la carte style of editing your images. And then I'm going to hop into the local adjustment here. So let's just go ahead from browse and go into develop and look at this photograph here. Now I know for a fact, because I do shoot with a Sony camera and it's a mirrorless and it's very dirty. It's always dirty. It's like no matter what I do, I clean it and then it's dirty again. So for me, having a brush that can fix things really quickly and easily, especially on the fly like I can here in Photo RAW, is really important to me. What I want to show you here is I'm going to, right here in the tone and color module, I'm just going to bring my exposure down a little bit, maybe increase that contrast a little bit. And I'm doing that because I want to bring out what's happening in that sky there so we can really see all of my dust spots. Then over here we have the retouch brush. So I can click on the retouch brush at any time, okay? This isn't just its own module somewhere else. It doesn't matter if I'm working on my tone and color or if I'm working on a different module, I can always have access to this fixer brush right here. So I'm going to use this retouch brush and just click right here and fix that spot. And I'm going to do this spot and then come up here to this spot. It's quick, it's intuitive, and it makes a really good selection of the area around it when I use that brush. Okay, so I'm just going to clean up some of these spots really quickly and easily here. And then I'm going to show you that when I reset these settings, all of my spots reset too. Okay, so as I'm editing this image, if I see more spots start to come up, I can always hop over to that retouch brush, click on that spot that I want to heal or fix, and I'm back to editing without having to worry too much about spots and where they might exist on my photograph. Now I want to talk about the a la carte style of editing here. So if I go over here to the right hand side, I maybe drop my highlights here to bring out that sky, maybe increase those shadows here to pump up the sunflowers that we see in that foreground. This is Grinter Farms in Kansas. Absolutely beautiful place to shoot the sunflower fields. Yes, that is a sunflower field that extends for days, okay? And then we just bump up that contrast and make it look a little bit better there. Maybe increase some of the temperature here to make it a little warmer. At any time, I can close this down. So if I don't want to see that tone and color module in my way as I'm editing, just close it down, come up here to show more, and I have all my other modules that I can make adjustments from. So I can come into maybe the glow adjustment here, maybe pump up some of that glow, increase some more contrast in that glowing contrast area there, minimize that, make it smaller, come into show more, maybe grab a curves adjustment layer, give me that sharp little S curve there if I wanted that, and close that down. So you see it's a buildup of things, and it's an a la carte style menu. So instead of having all of those features right in front of your face and you have to scroll through all of them, you get the opportunity to build and mix and match the editing style that you choose right from the develop module. A la carte, plug and play. It's like a tapas menu for editing your images. Awesome stuff. The other thing I want to talk about is local adjustments here. So if we click over here on local adjustments, you'll notice that our overall settings, that's going to stay the same, but we're going to hop over to these local adjustments, and now I get the ability to either paint with a brush or use the adjustable gradient tool here. So I'm going to click right here for this adjustable gradient tool. And this is really exciting. This, of all the features, I remember right after I discovered this, I was on the phone with the guys from ON1, and I told them, I said, you know what, I was up all night thinking about this one feature. And it sounds silly, it sounds crazy that someone would be awake all night, but I thought to myself, look at the possibilities when you have your adjustment brushes with the capabilities that we have here. So let me get into it before I get too excited. So let's say I drop the exposure a little bit to bring out this sky. Maybe I increase that contrast to bring out some more depth in that sky. Maybe drop those highlights a little bit, maybe increase those shadows, and then add some temperature adjustment to it, maybe make that a little warmer, make it a little bit more magenta. Okay, and then maybe even increase the saturation a little bit. So I'm really starting to pump up the volume of what's happening in that sky. As I said before though, if I need to use the retouch brush at any time I can. So I can click the retouch brush and I can come right here and say, okay, there's a spot that I missed. I can fix that up and I'm right back over to my local adjustments without ever having to go into another module. I'm still here in my local adjustments. That's a cool feature. But what I really want to touch on with these local adjustments is now it's not just the local adjustments that you make and you're stuck with these exposure, contrast, highlights, and shadows settings here. What we can do, we can even increase this detail quite a bit, make this really look really kind of gnarly HDR-ish so that you can really see the features of what's happening here. Normally I wouldn't do this, but I want to show you something here. I can click on this little icon here. This is going to show me the different blending options that I have now just for this brush. Okay, so now our local adjustments aren't just stuck with the exposure, contrast, and highlights. We have the ability to change the blending options. Okay, that's exciting because we can say, you know what, I like what it's doing to the tone of that sky, but I don't like what it's doing to the color. So if we change that to luminosity, we could get the tone of that effect without the color. The other really cool thing about this is I can say, I want my highlights to be protected from all that gnarliness that you've got going on up there. And I can protect my highlights from that local adjustment. I can protect shadows from that local adjustment. And I can even say only have this adjustment apply itself to my midtones and adjust that range. So it's only applying itself to my midtones. It's not adjusting anything on my highlights at this point because I've got them protected. That is awesome. I've never seen this before, okay? This is something that's really cool to me. So let's go ahead and bring that detail down because it looks pretty disturbing. But like I said before, going back to the first thing I showed you, we still have all these nasty things that are happening up there because of my dirty sensor. So I can click on that fix and just right here with that retouch brush and fix that spot, all these spots that I didn't know were there until I got into the really nitty gritty of things by increasing that detail to an extreme that I probably shouldn't have taken it from in the beginning, but you can really see those spots there and we clean those up. So spots that I didn't even know existed on my photo I'm seeing because of that local adjustment, and at any time I can hop over to that fix and I'm good to go. Come over to my overall settings and I'm back to my a la carte editing. All of this stuff in one place. And these are my absolute favorite features so far in Develop.
Well, the heck with all the cool blending modes. Next time I'm out visiting you, you got to take me to that place with all those sunflowers.
Definitely. It's actually Grinter Farms in Kansas.
Too
Epic
cool.
place to go to. It's miles of sunflowers.
It's a super, super cool
I said
location.
sunflowers for days in that video. I'm not joking.
Yeah, that
sunflowers
is
for days.
awesome. Well, for those of you just joining us, we're here. We're talking about the new ON1 RAW. Super exciting. If you missed the beginning of this session, don't worry about it. We're going to be taping all the sessions. There are 3 sessions today. At the end of each session, we're going to be doing a Q&A. And so you can submit any of your questions to #AskON1. And that's with the number 1. Super easy. We're going to be going through a whole bunch of questions at the end of this session. So features, there's just so much speed, there's so much flexibility, and the ability, the blending options that Blake points out, that's just an incredible way to be able to protect your raw edits. It's crazy. We're talking about the ability of masked, layered workflow with blending options in RAW, and fast. I mean, I don't know what could be more exciting.
Well, the other day I was telling you before, I was watching this show with my wife and my kids, and it was like the Oceans of the Deep or something like that. And on the surface of things, we love the ocean because it's fun to play on the top of the ocean. But as you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the ocean, there's actually fish down there that glow. And you start to see things that you could never see before because it's way deep down in the ocean. Where am I getting with this?
Yeah.
On the surface of things, Photo RAW has a lot of really cool things when you first jump into it with all these new features that are really exciting. But I think when you get down to the deepest depths of Photo RAW, when you get down into the level that I was showing in the video, where you're getting down into the blending options, you say, okay, wait a second. I have the ability to mask, so I mask my image. Then I can say only apply it to my midtones, but protect the highlights of my midtones and make the range a little bit. I mean, the possibilities that I have now with what was, I guess, if we want to call it tone mapping, it's not an official tone mapping software, but the capability to make HDR rendered images with my highlights being protected from halos and my shadows being protected from noise, all right there with those blending options, makes this really powerful. That's where the sea monsters glow.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
It's a good analogy because I think on the surface, for anyone who's used to using ON1's products, Photo 10, Photo 9, it's going to seem really seamless to you. It's not going to be that much different than what you're used to working with. But down deep, there'd be a whole bunch of cool stuff we've never seen before.
And it's not anywhere else, too. I mean, those are features that you can't find anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what I gravitate towards. And one of the things that I do when I research new software that comes out is I say, okay, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, and I stack them all up, and I see where things start to line up. And then I start to shave off things that I don't need and see where that software shines.
Right.
But this software kind of stands out so far on its own because of the capabilities of it. I can't tell you how many times I've been making a local adjustment in Adobe Camera Raw or something and said, you know what? I really wish it'd be nice if I could just apply this to just the midtones, but I can't do that with that local adjustment there. Or how about just protect the highlights of that area? I really like what's happening with the contrast here, but move that down a little bit. And the stuff that we're talking about right now is really heavy stuff, but that's the stuff that I like to get into. So, as you look at this, you have to take all the little pieces in strides and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this piece right here. Let's just play with opacity for a week and see what happens. I mean, it sounds like the most boring, non-sexy topic in the world when it comes to photography editing, but let's just focus on this one spot for a week. Then next week, I'm going to go into blending options. Then the next week, protection measures. Then the next week, and so on and so forth. Because once you get out of the realm of highlights, midtones, shadows, there's a whole nother world of things on your protection side of things that I think ON1 Photo RAW just shines at.
Well, I think that's a really good way of learning and about thinking about using the software. It's something that I work with my students in the field doing workshops with too. Don't look at the exposure triangle as a whole and be mystified by all the sides of it at the same time. Take a look at just shutter speed for a while. Really play with that. Put your camera in time mode. The same thing's true with this. You're going to be working with blending modes for a while. Just see what those do and really push them to their extremes.
Right.
See what's happening there and then back it down to where you want. The same thing goes with all the filters and adjustments and effects, all the developed settings, the local adjustments that we have now. And one of the things that I absolutely love in Photo RAW is the ability to bounce back and forth between all those things, and they're always accessible. They're a click away, and the engine's moving so quickly that you can get there fast.
And I think that's actually kind of an important thing to talk about because that's one of the new things that's kind of under the hood in Photo RAW, and it's the way that everything kind of works together in a stack. So if you start at the very, very bottom of that stack, you've got the original raw data. So we demosaic, we basically develop that raw data. At that point, it's this really ugly green flat file, but it's got all the color in the world and all the highlights and shadow details. Then right on top of that, that's actually where all the retouching occurs. So when you use the perfect eraser or the retouch brush, that applies right to that linear raw data. Then it goes through everything you do in develop. And develop is kind of the replacement for enhance, and that's what we think of as the place where you start with all your photos. And that's where you do the raw developing, if you will. That's where we take that linear raw data and make it look like a natural, beautiful looking photo. The stuff you do in the color and tone pane is really the key place for making those adjustments. That's where the exposure and the highlights and shadows and blacks and whites occur on that linear raw data. Then everything else you do inside of develop. Then on top of that is effects. Effects gives you a flexible stack where you can add whatever filters you want in whatever order you want and blend them however you want. So ultimate control on top, but still working on that full linear raw data. And then at the very top are those local adjustments. So the things that you do with the new adjustment brush or adjustable gradient are applied at the very top. And those are for your more common burning and dodging sorts of tasks. And there's actually shared between develop and effects. You notice there's a new tab called local adjustments, and that's in both modules. And those layers sit at the very top, and you can share them back and forth. And they work just like a filter does in effects. So you were talking about the blending options and the control. It's really all about control. You have the exact same blending options that you have in effects on those adjustment layers and the same masking capabilities. So one of the things that I find frustrating in Lightroom is that, yes, there's those local adjustment tools, but I've got a brush or I've got a gradient, and I can't mix them, and I can't copy and paste them. With using all of the great masking tools that are in RAW, I can start off with a luminosity mask if I wanted to. I could then add a gradient on top of that, or as many gradients as I want. They mix together. I can use the brush with a perfect brush option. Or if I'm in effects, I can use all those advanced masking tools like the refine brush for tough stuff like hair and smoke. I could then take that mask I've created and I can use it multiple times. I can copy and paste or even invert it. I do that all the time where I'll want to work on one area that I want to cool, and then I want to take the exact opposite area and I want to warm it up.
Yeah.
Rather than redoing all that masking work, I just copy and paste and then invert my mask. So all the control you could ever want.
I think it's really important to know how those things work too, so that when you're working with ON1 Photo RAW, you know what parts are taking priority over other parts based on where they are in that sandwich, if you will.
It's
of
just
editing.
raw
a
sandwich.
giant photo raw sandwich, and everything is customizable. It's like a little sheet of paper, and you get to check off all the things that you want, and then if you decide you don't want anything anymore, you're like, you know what? No cheese, please. And you just take it off.
Yeah.
It's the best sandwich you will ever have.
Right. Well, and it makes a whole lot of sense as you describe how the processor is building upon each layer of the workflow process. It really kind of mirrors a lot of what I've done in the past.
Yes.
Before we had this raw processor that you can bounce through and finish edit your raw photos. I mean, I would do all this work in Adobe Camera Raw or in Lightroom's develop module and then get it all kind of dialed and do a PSD file to do my finish edits and effects with. Well, you're doing the same thing, but we're just keeping it all in that raw file non-destructively. You're not baking any changes in. You can always go back, because that was one of my frustrations. I would get an image completely finish edited in layers or effects, and then I'd realize, oh, you know what, I didn't do enough sharpening and noise reduction, or I didn't get the color quite right, and I'd really like to do that at the raw level. I've got to back up and start over. So there's going to be a lot of interesting workflow shifts. But Blake and I are going to talk a little bit more about that.
What I really liked was the retouch tool too. We're being able to just touch on those and say, okay, you know what? Because it's not a clone stamp. Because I'm a Photoshop guy, I think in terms of layers and stamps and everything. And with the clone stamp, you take a section of this area and you put it on this area. And then what happens when you make another layer underneath there that's not synced with that clone stamp, you now have your stamp looks like a big circle on the middle of your image.
Yeah.
It's like a pimple on your photograph, Whereas now, with this retouch brush, you saw in there, as I adjusted the settings, it adjusted that retouch brush also, because it's happening at that lower level like you were talking about. And I think that's really important to know too, because if you know how that stack works, you kind of get a better understanding of how you should be working on your workflow. So that tells me, okay, if this is happening down here, I should probably do this first work my way up, and then maybe get to those local adjustments last. But the beauty is that you can seamlessly transition between them without having to worry about where it exists. I like to know that stuff because I'm a control freak.
Well, and I think that's a really exciting thing, that if as you're in the later stages, you decide, well, oh wait, there was a bunch of dust that didn't come out till I really got my dynamic contrast right. Yep. When I go in and add that healing tool, it's gonna develop. It's gonna bloom at the bottom level and propagate through all the layers.
And that actually happened in that video too, where I put that dynamic contrast on the sky, and I was like, "Ooh, my sensor's a lot dirtier than I thought it was."
That's a great way to actually find the dust. That's a great tip. As you add a dynamic contrast, crank the small slider up, you'll see all the dust. You can retouch it, and then you just remove that filter.
Exactly.
So a great way to do it. So.
Well, I know that a lot of you guys out there, there's a lot of information that's coming at you. And I know many of you guys probably have questions about this. I know that one of the things Blake was mentioning was talking about blending options and all the different changes that you can make. And some of those can get a little confusing. I also know that a lot of these features are really, really big and new. And so you guys want to know more about them. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Dan so that you guys can answer some of these questions that you tweeted at us with that hashtag #AskOn1. So.
All right, so lots of questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to get to the ones that we see pop up the most. Probably the number one question we get is, my camera supported? You know, I've got this camera or that camera. Do you actually have support for it? And the short answer is most likely yes. We support almost 1,000 different cameras out there from the last 20 years. If it's a newer camera from a popular manufacturer made in the last decade, it goes through our brand new Tier 1 RAW engine. That goes through the GPU. It's lightning fast. You get all the highlight and shadow detail. Anything from Canon, Nikon, Sony, Fuji, Olympus, anything in the last 10 years you'll see in there. And then there's another batch of cameras that are supported by our Tier 2 engine. These are going to be the older, more esoteric cameras. If you've got an old Nikon D1X files or old Kodak files, it'll go through this older engine. You'll still get all of the raw data, it just won't be quite as fast to go through it. If you have a really, really new camera and you don't see it on the list, that means we're probably working on it. So every month we'll have an update, a free update that will add new camera support. But we have to be able to get the camera and the files and run some tests to be able to get you great looking images out of it. All right, a couple more questions. There were lots of questions about sidecar files that came up when I was talking about how I use the sidecar files in Dropbox. So there's actually two different sidecar files that you can create. The first one is an XMP sidecar file. An XMP sidecar file is an Adobe standard, and it allows you to interchange data between different applications. So when you come in through Browse and you change keywords or metadata, you add stars or labels, we'll automatically create an XMP sidecar file. Then if you take those photos to any other product that understands XMP, something like Camera Raw or Lightroom or Bridge, it'll pick up those changes for you automatically. It'll see your ratings and labels and metadata. And it actually works both directions. So I could actually go to Bridge or Lightroom, add data there, and I'll see it back inside of Photo RAW. And those sidecar files are very, very tiny. Think of it like a little text file. Yeah. The other sidecar file, the one you turn on, is the ON1 sidecar file. That's a different sidecar file. That's the one where we actually store all of our editing settings. And we chose to do that in our own file type because there's certain data structures that go into that don't work well in an XMP file. Plus, it also protects us. So if there's an app out there that doesn't do a good job of supporting XMP, all of your settings could get blown away. Whereas if it's in our file that we control, we can guarantee those settings are going to be good and not get touched. So lots of questions on that. I think there was another question in here about how the files get managed. And let me see how to talk about this. So in Lightroom, there's this concept of a catalog. The catalog is kind of the document, if you will, for Lightroom. And when you start to work, you have to import your photos into that catalog. And that takes a little bit of time, of course, to do that. And then all of your information gets stored in this one kind of monolithic catalog or database. Photo RAW works a little bit differently. It's a browser at heart. So underneath, all you do is just browse to your files, and it will show you thumbnails very quickly. You can start to work on them. Doesn't matter where the photos live. It could live on your local drive, an external drive, live in the cloud, live in your Dropbox. Doesn't really matter. Right. You can just browse to it, see those files right away. So it doesn't matter what folder structure you have. You can organize your photos however you want, and RAW will just see those files in whatever folder structure. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. I organize my photos based on subject matter. Right. So I'll have my landscapes and my portraits and my tabletop shots, and inside of that I'll break it down. Other people organize by date and time. So
Clients.
I have a hybrid.
Yeah. And I'm a Windows guy, so I use Windows Explorer, which is basically just your file explorer. Mm-hmm. And I make a folder and say, okay, 2016, 1121, at ON1 Studio, and that's my way of cataloging, if you want to call it cataloging. I'm using the dictionary term catalog, not the Lightroom term catalog. And I just put my files in there. And I love that because I've been using that system for the last 18 years. So all my files are held that way. So now my biggest fear was, okay, now I'm going to have something that's going to have to micromanage my system. And I didn't like that. And that's why I've never adopted Lightroom, because I didn't want something to micromanage my system. But here I don't have micromanagement. I have a supplemental system that I can use alongside with the system that I've been using for the last 18 years with zero to no real change for me on the structure side of things. But a huge change for me because I actually have a folder called Best Photos Ever. And that's my form of a 5-star, all right? So that's like my file that I index. It's like, oh, those are my portfolio pieces. But now I have the luxury of starring things. I've never had that before because of my archaic system. It's literally medieval. It's like the most medieval system you could have. And a lot of people laugh at it, but you know what? That's my system, and it works for me.
Oh.
And that's when it comes to cataloging and organizing your photographs, everybody's going to be different. Yeah. We talked about this before on a side conversation about the importance of making something that adapts to everyone's workflow. And the fact that you made this, because most programs don't like to adopt to my workflow of cataloging, but this system does, and that's what I love about this.
It's very, very flexible.
Yeah.
You know.
From the most advanced system to the most archaic system like mine.
And really quickly, one of the things that I love is I always bring my images into a year. You know, I have a 2016 folder, and then inside that I categorize things by date and shoot name. So it could be a client, it could be a location. And then when I want to find an image, you can use the filter in ON1's browse and just type in Patagonia and click 3 stars, and I will see all the images. I don't have to go searching through folders to find them.
Yeah, and that's something people, they miss. When we say that, you know, there's no cataloging process, they assume that means you actually lose all of those kind of database-oriented options. That's not true. Anything that you put in what we call an index folder, think of it like a favorite, will scan in the background automatically. So any new files that are added, any changes that are made in or out of the system will get picked up automatically, so you don't have to worry about files getting lost. It keeps an eye on them. And all of the metadata is extracted and put into a local database so that we can actually search that.
It's really cool.
And the good news about that too is that I'm gonna kind of throw you under the bus a little bit here, okay? So with ON1 Photo 10, you told me about the index thing with browse. So I did it, and when I did that, I even had conversations with you back and forth about how everything on my computer slowed down. I mean, even the internet slowed down. And I did a speed test to see. And I said the speed test too, because that's how analytical I am. But the beauty of Photo RAW is that I indexed a couple folders and haven't seen a single difference. So whatever you did in the background of that, it worked, just so you know.
That's another one of those areas that's going to rebuild from the ground up.
But that's good news, because I know that other people have emailed me too and said, hey, I like this, but it's slowing things down. And my response was, yeah, me too. But now I can say that's not the case anymore. So, you know, that's a good thing. That shows that continuous improvement process that you're always implementing into this, and I appreciate that. So
yeah, and you know, I'm lazy. I don't like adding keywords. I'm just not a metadata guy. So the cool thing is because I put it in folders, you know, I'll have landscape, United States, Oregon, Columbia Gorge. All I have to do is type in Columbia Gorge, and it finds that folder and all the photos inside of it automatically. Awesome. So I don't have to go through and add all those keywords. It's smart enough to search it based on path name. But you can search by date and keywords and camera and any of those metadata fields and options.
Turning now, because that's how I do label my stuff. So I'm golden.
Yeah, and you can even create albums and smart albums that will perform a search based on that. Yeah. So you could actually have an album that said, you know, find anything whose path contains this name, and it would pop up automatically. And as you add new folders and files, it would just find them. So
that's awesome.
I think the take home from that question is just that it adapts to whoever's system, and it aids you with ways of finding your files faster.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now I see lots of questions about Lightroom and how Photo RAW and Lightroom can work together. We're going to talk a lot about that in a little bit, but I'll give you the one question that we get a lot is, all right, if I make edits in Photo RAW, will I see those edits inside of Lightroom and vice versa? And the answer is maybe. Depends on how you did it, actually. So you have to keep in mind that a RAW processor is a walled garden. All of the edits you do in a non-destructive world are really only visible in that app. So if I go into Lightroom and I make changes in those developed sliders, the only place I'm going to see that on that raw photo is inside of Lightroom. Right. Same thing. That's the way non-destructive editing works. Now you can export from either of those apps, and you'll be able to get a version where those raw edits are cooked, if you will, into the photo.
Right.
A great middle ground are smart photos. So you can still use the smart photos like you have in the past, where I could take a photo from Lightroom, for example, bring it in to layers, and then still use development effects in a non-destructive, re-editable way, but I'll see those finished results back in Lightroom.
But it'll be on a PSD file or a JPEG.
It'll
or
be on a PSD file, but it's still re-editable. All those settings are still there.
PSD is where you should go.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Let's see. We've got some other questions in here. Will I be able to convert my Lightroom presets to ON1 Photo RAW presets? And I've got some great news for you guys. Coming in Q1 is the new Lightroom Migration Assistant. It'll make it a lot easier for you to transfer your information from Lightroom into Photo RAW. So not only will it bring across all of your collections and smart collections, it'll bring across any presets you've created, and beyond that, for every photo, it will bring in all of the metadata and all of the settings that you've done to it. So if you've gone in and you've changed the brightness and contrast in Lightroom, those same changes will happen automatically inside of Photo RAW.
Same thing. Would that work with Adobe Camera Raw also?
Yep, as long as it probably. We haven't built it yet, so that's a great question.
Sorry.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Another question is, does Photo RAW have lens correction? So today, when it initially ships, there will be some manual lens correction where you can correct for perspective and barrel distortion, pin cushion distortion, things like that.
It's really good.
Yeah, I was
It's
going to say,
pretty
which
good.
is still really important.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we point that out.
But it'll get even better. And we'll talk a lot about what's coming in the future in our session this afternoon. But I will tell you that automatic lens correction based on lens and body profiles will be coming. It'll be part of a free update.
That's important. That'll be great.
Yeah.
Well, and for people who are Lightroom users, diehard Lightroom users, Hudson, that's gonna make a big difference. For some of us who kind of switch back and forth and can't ever make up their mind,
Yeah.
man, this is making me sound very indecisive. I love all of these products, and I love using all of them. But it's great because I have presets in all of the different programs I use. I have actions in Photoshop, and I love the fact that a lot of the stuff that I do in Lightroom I can take over. But there's a lot of stuff I've made in ON1. I mean, I survive in my business on presets.
And I'm going to say really quickly that sometimes the automatic lens corrections in Lightroom are not what I want.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're making a creative decision for me, and I think a lot of people lock in, well, this is what's right. That's
Exactly.
what somebody's kind of decided is right.
Yeah.
But you can creatively do things in your lens correction.
Exactly.
Well, a lot of us
There's
buy a
reason
lens
why,
for a certain reason, I bought a fisheye because I want a fisheye.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
I just bought a fisheye, and someone's like, "Why would you do that? Don't you have to de-fisheye?" Why would I de-fisheye?
It's the whole idea. Yeah.
That's the personality behind it.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So everybody wants to know about Fuji X-Trans sensors. Yes, we will support Fuji. We've actually done a lot of work to make sure that we get great results out of Fuji files. Not only is it super fast, it's as fast as any other RAW photo to open those, but the quality of the demosaicing is great. So there's a lot of difficulties that you'll see in other applications when you deal with Fuji files, where it can kind of get kind of an odd pattern sometimes in areas like grass and tree branches. We've worked really hard to make sure that we maintain all the detail and have great noise reduction to reduce the noise in those specific X-Trans sensors, which work quite a bit differently than other cameras do.
I love the fact that there are thousands, the phrase thousands of camera profiles. It's kind of shocking. I have lived in this Canon world because my father is a Canon photographer. Well,
Not anymore.
not anymore. Thanks, Dad. My dad was a Canon photographer for a long time, and so I survived off of hand-me-downs and whatever I could rent at school when I was in college. And cameras are expensive, and so everybody's always talking about these new cameras, and I'm like, well, I still got my Canon. Like, how are there thousands of camera profiles? And I love the fact that you guys cover this, because to me, I'm just shocked that I'm like, wow, you have a Nikon? That's incredible.
But every model of Canon and Nikon and Sony and Fuji are also different.
Yes.
So there's
Yeah.
hundreds of Canon profiles.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. And we actually work really hard to make sure that the initial color and the initial brightness and contrast that you get looks like what you saw on the back of the camera. That's really important to people. I always have that disappointment where I shoot it and look at it like, oh, that's great. And I take a picture with my iPhone so I can share it, and then I get back and I put the picture like, oh, now it's all flat, and I got to do a bunch of work. So we
Yeah.
work really hard to make sure it looks great right out of the box.
Well, and
too.
it's interesting that we have this conversation now. I mean, think about it. 20 years ago, what would the camera profile be? The film that
The
you
film.
used?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
it. That was the only struggle that they had to deal with. But now you have thousands upon thousands of camera profiles that you have to deal with when you're creating these ON1 or with the RAW processing software. So
Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. And is there something similar to clarity inside of ON1 Photo RAW? You bet there's actually a couple different ones you can use. There's a brand new control called Structure inside of Develop, which is a great local contrast tool, which looks a lot like what you're used to seeing in Clarity in Lightroom. But then there's also dynamic contrast you can add through effects. And I think we all love and use dynamic
Yes.
contrast
Everybody loves
probably
dynamic
more than we
contrast.
should.
everyone knows dynamic
It's an
contrast
addiction.
and sunshine.
We're all addicted to
Yeah.
dynamic contrast. It's
Yeah.
okay.
If you're a new user and you haven't used dynamic contrast, it is amazing. It can bring out the smallest details in your photo. It can remap the contrast tones locally. It really makes your photos pop, and it's a great tool. I use it probably far more than I should.
And it's great for stylization, but also for output sharpening for printing.
yeah.
You know, so I mean, you have the best of both worlds in there.
Yeah. All right. Well, I thank everybody for joining us. This is the end of session 1. Your questions have been fabulous. Continue to submit them, and we'll get them in the later sessions today. Again, this is being recorded, so you can watch it again later. If you want to submit those questions, you use Twitter. It's hashtag #AskOn1, ON number 1.
Whenever I visit the Olympic coast, I seem to fall in love with it a little bit more, and this trip has been no exception. No matter how many times I come here, I always find something new to inspire me. Something I've always wanted to try here is to photograph the stars. I've shot star photos in the mountains, like this shot from the rim of Mount St. Helens, but never in a place like this. The sea stacks here offer an epic foreground to put in front of the Milky Way, if you can pull off the shot. There are a lot of variables conspiring against you. For it to work, the stars really have.
And we're back. Sorry about that little technical glitch there. That's the end of session 1 for today. I thank everybody for coming. Reminder, this session is recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again in the future. We really appreciate all your questions that have come in. If you want to add more questions, we'll keep answering them throughout the day. You'll do that through Twitter using the hashtag